Good evening, and welcome to One-to-One Tech Chat, where I'm in Maine, and part of our crew is in Boston, and part of our crew is in Iowa. And we're hoping some other people will join us, but we'll have the regular chat going at the same time. We're getting ready for EdiPad. Is that how you say it? I never really say it out loud.
iPad.
iPad.
So if you want to go freestyle and call it EdiPad, I suppose you could do that.
EdiPad. We're in Boston. How about if I let the Boston people introduce themselves?
I'm Sean McCusker, one of the organizers of the One-to-One Tech Chat Shindig that we do. And with me here, and also in Boston for the ETT iPad conference is...
Hi, I'm Beth Holland. I'm not normally from Boston, but I am today here for iPad Summit. I work with Sean with EdTech Teacher Things, and usually I'm on Twitter land, but now it's just fun. We're in Google land.
Mm-hmm. No, to Iowa.
Iowa.
Hello, friends from Iowa. I'm Shaylin Farnsworth. I'm also one of the organizers for One-to-One Tech Chat, and it is very cold here. Probably colder than Jonathan and Sean and Beth.
It's coming this way.
It's coming.
We'll get it tomorrow.
Give it a day.
So I'll ask people to take a second to introduce themselves on Twitter and see who's joining us for this evening. And as always, if you're joining us for just the Twitter part, feel free to jump in anytime. Feel free to tweet out some questions for us. We'll be happy to share materials as we go through sessions tomorrow. But I also put out the schedule for the various sessions if you want to take a look at what we're talking about. There are several different tracks for the conference, and so we're going to spend a little time on each of the questions this evening on each of those tracks. And then we will come back around to some bigger picture issues for our last couple questions. But our first question is going to come from the broadest possible point of view, which is how do we think about 2014 as a one-to-one year as we close that out, and what are we looking forward to in 2015 that is going to define one-to-one experiences. And I will say as a starting point that the biggest change I've experienced this year is moving tech from an addendum to a central piece of what we do. And it's a really interesting mental shift for me to say, so for example, today I was visiting a school where the question was posed, how much time do you spend on technology in your professional development? And the director's answer was 0. We spend a ton of time on professional development, which is augmented by, which is a piece of some broader growth. But per se, there is no, he said that's training, and we have some training, but there is no professional development per se, which stems from that. And that for me, as a shift mentally, has been my biggest kind of rethinking in 2014.
I'm going to go with the biggest change for me is understanding what the technology does. It's not just having it, it's not just employing it, it's how it changes relationships. And I think that the relationships in a one-to-one classroom are necessarily flatter because the students are doing more and responsible for more content. And it's, depending on the course that you're in, the teacher's job to articulate the individualized learning and connecting that students are doing into a group experience, and how do you mold that into a group experience. But I also think that what's important is student-centered activities. More should be going to the students. They should be constructing more, they should be directing more, they should be choosing more. And as you do all of that, those choices expose needs and strengths. And then we as a teacher have to look and see what that, like it's a compilation of those choices, and then really evaluate the room to decide what changes we have to make. We're contextualizers in a one-to-one classroom, putting content and needs and questions and choices together to make bigger understanding. So that's what I spend a lot of time talking about or thinking about these days for my classroom.
What about you, Shaylin? Should we go to Beth first instead?
Oh, me? I mean, I think a lot of it right now, and a lot of what I've talked to people about, is really starting to focus more on process instead of product. You know, like a lot of times it's, well, I don't know how to do an iMovie project, or, you know, I really want to make sure that we're working on this, you know, like this essay or this paper, and it's like starting at product and not necessarily looking at process. So starting to really back up and say, well, regardless of what the device is, like how can we really start to support the way that we're getting our students to take ownership of their learning? And I think that's becoming a shift, like really being able to start to have those conversations about, you know, how do we support learning, how do we support process, how do we get students and teachers, like, you know, thinking about things from a different light. That's what I'm talking about in the next few days. How's that?
Perfect. Shaylin, you are muted. That's why I wasn't hearing you.
That is totally fine. Geez, a million things running through my head right now. I think that we'll start seeing a shift in reimagining school structure and time. Opportunities are beginning to creep in mainstream because of technology to redefine what is learning, what is teaching, who's the teacher, who's the learner. So I can see a shift in a redefinition of school because of the ubiquitous tech. I kind of agree with Beth. I think it's more about the process, and I know Beth and I are big literacy nerds, and that's the beauty of all the new literacies that technology has brought to our world. And my focus is always on student voice and adding their voice to the global communication while maintaining their own idea and identity. So I think while we'll see our world shrinking, it'll be necessary for these young people to equip themselves with what differentiates them from the rest of the world.
I loved in Chicago, Will Richardson was the keynote at ETT Summit, and posing the question in his book, Why School? And I felt like that really crystallized for me what had been emerging the first half of the year, and as I've entered this year, really thinking about, first half of the calendar year, as I entered this school year, really thinking consistently, okay, what is unique about this experience? And what all three of you are saying about how it is still about the relationships in the process and the experience of school being that collaborative piece and the critical thinking together is a really important part of the learning, and yet it's really easy in a one-to-one environment to let that take a back seat as you stay, as Beth said, really focus on the product. I don't care. I mean, I actually had a teacher ask my colleague and I to come in and advocate for not making iMovies in her class, to please tell her students, do something other than iMovies because I'm tired of watching them, and you're doing them to make movies, you're not doing them to demonstrate learning or to sort of demonstrate your deep thinking. And I love that. It was sort of a hilarious but great shift. I mean, a year ago, everyone's like, come tell me about iMovie, and now they're like, you know what, they're working towards creating an iMovie, not towards creating a great product for my social studies class.
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
So I don't mean to interrupt, but along that, so Scott Meach, I don't know where he is now. He was in Downers Grove, Illinois. So he did a webinar last year, and he had the most awesome, the way he phrased it was he said he knew that, like, real transformation was happening in his classroom, and like real learning was happening when he was walking through, and a teacher wouldn't be saying like, oh, I really want my students to do this iMovie project. It's I really want my students to do this project that demonstrates their learning of whatever or demonstrates their understanding. And when it led with those objectives, he knew that there was real learning that was happening. Right?
I think we can get into discussing what words we use, and I've been calling it lately, it's just expressions of learning. It's not homework, it's an expression of learning. And so long as, in the end, my students can say, here's the learning objective, and here's how I'm going to express my understanding of that learning, I don't really care the format of it. I might distribute it and say, hey, we're working on writing today, we're working on this skill, but there's some times where the point is to prove to me that you've learned, and then express that in the conveyance that best does it. And I think a next level teaching skill that students are really going to, that will really measure the way that they learn is if they can identify the specific format that best fits the learning that they've done. Is this something that I can express in a video? Is this something I can express in a poster? Is this something that's better? Like, what is that format that's better? Maybe it's better than writing. And that shows a savvy understanding of what you're learning if you know what is the best format for its expression in terms of learning. So I kind of get excited about giving students that chance and letting someone say, you know what, I know, Mr. McCusker, that I can make a song work. I had students working on projects at school today, and I missed that. I kind of missed the process of them creating. But they would send me emails, and one of them was so excited to do a slam poem that she was done 10 minutes into the first day of class time. She didn't want to wait. So that kind of excitement and energy to make your own expression. If we tell them what to use and how to use it, like I said this today in our workshop, you're turning an app into a worksheet. Give them some leeway to go outside of the lines and define their expression of learning.
I think that's an interesting point you bring up, Sean, and it reminds me when I was working on the Genius Timer, the passion-based learning with my students, and part of the requirement was they had to share their learning and their knowledge with the world, any vehicle that they chose, and we had students create YouTube channels or Google sites, blogs. So they found the mode that worked best for their needs and communicating their message. And so, again, it kind of points back to literacy. Understanding how communication works in a digital age is so essential to not only know how to use all the multimodal inputs and outputs that are part of the new literacies, but then how to bring audience to your message and how to be advocates for yourself and for others.
Yeah. The next question, a couple things I want to highlight from the discussion. Sean Scanlon, Polo Nerd, says we need to take a closer look at our resources like textbooks versus online resources and focus on content and creation, which is a great way to phrase it. And I love Gary, I don't know if it's Sipinko or Chipinko. We also need to vet those resources. New is not always better. And I think that has really been a shift for me, too, that it is, iPads in particular lend themselves to this sense of constant updating and constant change. And yes, that clearly all the new things they can do are fantastic, but both where I was today, which was Foxcroft Academy in Dover, Foxcroft, Maine, and New Hampton Academy, where I visited last spring, they're both very, very agile iPad one-to-one schools because they work from a certain series of assumptions about what everyone can do, and then in addition allow people to explore the other pieces. But I love that concept that there's a sort of a baseline series of apps that together smashed will give you the kind of content creation you want. And then if there are moments when you need content delivery, great. If there are other moments where you need something unique, the frog that's being dissected in biology app is fantastic, great. But there is still a core of, in my world, it's Explain Everything, Notability, and the Google Apps for Education suite that really sort of lay the groundwork for almost all the other work that's happening. And today I've become convinced that maybe we do need something like iBooks Author or Book Creator, which is something Greg Kulowitz has argued for a long time.
You need Book Creator or Creative Book Builder.
We were talking about this today. So many apps came out, and they were one-trick ponies early on. And they did screencasting, or they made a book. Maybe they could turn it into a PDF if they were really awesome. They could do like an iBook and a PDF. And now we've seen the evolution of these tools. Book Creator's gone from being something you can make books with to Book Creator makes video as well as any other app out there right now. So you have some very dynamic apps that have realized that an app needs to do a lot. To make it, I think it has to do with the price point too. You're going to spend how much money to get it for everybody in your school. It better make a picture, export as a book, create a PDF, and turn into a video. And I think that you've seen a separation between that which is quality and that is going to make the cut for a district to use, and the stuff that is a one-off that somebody produces on the quick that only does one thing now. I think that's probably a good separation for education and apps.
So we've already begun in this area, but next question on the floor was what student creativity looks like in a one-to-one context that's different from student creativity in other places. And Carl Hooker uses the term afford, which I love, saying, what is it the one-to-one affords that we wouldn't have otherwise? And I think if we can answer that question in a context, in my school, we're still trying to sell the iPad and say, this can really do amazing things for you. And probably the biggest selling point is that opportunity for unique creation that doesn't exist in other places, and the ability to hold on to that in a way that then, as we talked about a couple weeks ago with Authentic Audience, carries over into the ability to push it out. And Greg always says at the end of his talks, what do you do when you're done? You get it off the iPad and start again. And I've begun to think of it as almost like poster night at parent night at school, writ large, as big an audience as you can reach. That's something that, in terms of the creativity folding over immediately into an authentic audience, or the capacity to share with an authentic audience, it is a really powerful tool, whether it's your day-to-day, today we did subject-verb agreement, or much bigger. This is the culmination. My son's classroom does a beautiful night at the museum to culminate an ancient cultures study, and we're welcome to go there, but all the artifacts and everything that's been created is also publicly available, whether or not you're able to be there for the night. And that, to me, and into the future as well, for years, for other kids to go back, and students and parents to look at a later point.
I think that you were talking about authentic audience, and that's definitely true. I like to think about it in terms of voice, because for some kids who can't speak up loudly, they can make products that have a weight and a gravity that's way bigger than their voice will ever be in social situations. And you can extend learning, but not just extending learning for the person who creates that product. You're extending the learning from the quietest corner of your classroom to the far different sections of your school. And one of the things I always think about is, what if there was a receptacle for your school where work was found, where your first graders could see sixth grade work, and where fifth graders can come and visit some excellent third grade work, and where the third grade could see what the other third grade classes were doing, kind of like that TAC board used to be in the hallway, but a place where you could academically do it without having to leave and go someplace else. So I think it would be amazingly powerful for a school to have that kind of a community space with all of their shared work, where people from around the world can come and see what a school is about. If somebody moves into town and want to know what your school is about, don't come and look and ask for something. Go look at what the work actually is that is shared there. And the power that would be available for sharing makes that work meaningful. You validate everything that you do. And then it comes down to not just your Googling someone's name is their resume, but your school's report card is just the products that you can produce and the dynamism with which people, with which they're viewed. I think that's something maybe we can look at, is like maybe that's the measure of schools, actual products of learning. Not saying, hey, look at this awesome products of learning, now bubble this, and let's take those bubbles and see if you're successful. I think there's other ways, and maybe that wall of examples would be a fantastic way to look and say, yeah, this school gets it.
We have recently been through a transformation of our library space to be, and you and I, Sean, have talked about the role librarians play. So I'm a library and instructional technology specialist who came to librarianship from being an English teacher and from that context of tech integration and that discipline. But what I'm coming to appreciate is that there's this huge other capacity of libraries to be that communal space and that shared space. So the image I'm showing right now is our open house when we opened the Learning Commons, and the biggest change is that the only fixed structures are everything that's on the walls. So everything inside those walls moves, and will allow us this evening. There are people doing grant presentations in that space, and it's set up as a theater for 120 people. And at other points, it's small classrooms, and it's art gallery, and it is whatever, in the same way that the iLab is. Is that in San Diego or San Francisco?
San Francisco.
San Francisco. The iLab, I loved that observation that the iLab starts as a kind of question, what are we going to do with the space today? And then the learning has begun before anything happens at the teachers actually directing any kind of activity. So I think you really do have some amazing opportunities, and I would say that my study and my personal experience is that a library is a great place to do that. And as I've been introduced to the teacher librarians that are part of ISTE, really coming to appreciate that there is a new age and a new locus, physical and digital, for that in a library that's willing to take that on. But of course, that completely redefines what people think of as a library space. And that terminology, Learning Commons, emerged. David Lorcher's concept emerged from that vision of the change.
I think it's hard to convince people when you talk about one-to-one devices. You're getting a device, so you're just handing out these devices to people. But to convince them that it could change the culture of your school and make you redefine your library, it's hard for people to see how the tendrils of that change can happen. But I think there's a great demand for collaborative spaces, and I think there's a great demand for to extend that collaboration to places. And I think that the librarian it's a no-brainer to have a librarian become someone who is going to help articulate that research and help manage. There's so many resources in the internet, in the interwebs, and
On the line.
Who's the expert that we already have? Are we going to expect every teacher to be an expert? Like, we could be proficient, but I think the librarian has always been a resource and adjudicator of sources, and they can continue to be that. Which is why when Jonathan and I talked, and I came up with this idea before I got to be influenced by Jonathan's ideas, I think that the librarian is one of the most important people in any one-to-one program. And if you put them in a position to support and help and train teachers on resources, citations, and the fair application and crediting of those resources, that's a very powerful position for them, but also an important one for the school.
I have to jump in here, Sean, because I don't always disagree. I rarely disagree with you, but I do disagree with that last point that you...
Loud.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, Sean?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. About the last point that you made about librarians being the most important role, and I would say that the most important role falls in the hands of the principal. Without a strong leader who walks the talk, who has a clear vision of where they're heading, who creates that culture, who provides those opportunities, the librarian would be non-functional. So I disagree with that point. I think it takes a strong leader first.
I don't disagree with you. I think you're right. I think you know, because anytime you're talking about redefining roles, who's going to do that? Who's the one who dictates the changes in those roles from traditional to redefined? And so I won't disagree with what you're saying. I think that it's important for a principal to see what needs to change and what new responsibilities are redefined or tweaked. I don't know, a reevaluation of the balance of the school within those programs.
Well, the principal not only has to know
I think you.
the focus and the vision. It has to be one of the first learners, but also how to create those opportunities, monitor them, make sure that they're being implemented, giving people, you know, the freedom and creativity, kind of in the big arrow theory. So freedom within form, right? So everybody's heading towards the same end goals, but differentiation. So without that leader that can temper that partnership relationships, then a one-to-one school is doomed.
Yeah.
Any school implementing any sort of change, I should say.
Managing change, even if it isn't technology, is always been something schools have to work on. And I think that in this, I think it's Pierce. I've been reading a lot about change management and cultural changes. And when does change become something that can be sustained? And I don't think we can do a pass-by on technological changes and expect them to take root and become real change. If we want substantive change, address the changes that are happening, like what happens to the librarian. There's some schools where, like, well, I don't think we need a library now. We've got all these online resources. I totally disagree with that. But
I think it's not that you don't need a library, just, you know, because there might be online services, but I think you still need, like, there's that critical expertise of knowing that there's someone that can help you make sense of it. And so it's, I like the way that, you know, there's been the beginning trend of, like, you need a learning commons. Like, you need a common, like, a common space within the school community where you've designated and said, you know, we really want to make sure that we're coming here to work together to start to construct knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Someone said that later.
Yeah, somebody write that down, because
Write
she was
that
she
down.
just spit that out, and she's not going to remember it in the morning.
Dang. What did I...
The piece that I think is the blend of those two, in my experience, is that we have a kind of, I guess we have a twin issue, in that the library was the librarian's position was re-envisioned by our administration. The space by the people who were hired into that, and it's the sort of reciprocal thing that happens. And I guess what I've been increasingly realizing is that a single charismatic leader is actually as problematic as not having one, because if it is all on the shoulders of that person, Patrick Larkin did an amazing job of lighting a fire in Burlington that he doesn't alone have to maintain. And I feel like you visit Burlington and you see left, right, and center all kinds of different things happening that are about the change. But any one of those people leaving, I mean, Andy Marcinek left, Jen Sheffer steps in and does this incredible job picking up and moving forward with the student tech team ball. But then the student tech team is comprised of students who are a part of it too. So there's, what we haven't reached in Cape Elizabeth is that tipping point where it begins to be self-sustaining. And so it's almost like you need both the, here we go into my science of a long time ago, but you need the thing that's going to light it, that would be the whatever, the spark, and then the thing that's going to keep it going. But I don't know, I keep visiting these schools where they are already there, like they're already over that hump, or they're not, and the places that have a charismatic leader trying to do it by themselves in any position are by and large not over the hump. They're just sort of looking like, ooh, this is going to be really cool, but it hasn't been enough to have any one person be leading the charge.
Well, I think probably the point that you're the point that I'm understanding you making is what I'm in agreement with as well. The leader of the school has to have a, as Knight says, a partnership relationship, and the type of leader that you were talking about, I would classify more as out for me instead of out for we. And so those people that are in it for the wrong reasons set up for failure as well, because teachers and kids can see right through that.
I'm sure you
Yeah,
did.
and
That was a great phrase.
I agree with that, and I think that sometimes we see the initiative as a mark for our success, but I think it's not just the rollout, it's not just the handout, it's not just that moment of the physical transportation of handing them out, but we're talking about permeation and how you can get the ability to express better to more people and then transfer that from just having a device into, think of it this way, you can walk into a kindergarten class and hand out all the fat pencils that you want. That doesn't mean kids are going to be able to write their name all day. We're going to still have to do the structure there for everything else at first until they take off on their own, who can write beautiful, calligraphy script, and then encourage themselves, the kids who are still remember what to dot and what to cross, to get past that. And the technology is very much the same. We would never do anything else that we're on without meaning for them. And I think that sometimes people just think, well, we've had computer labs for 20 years. This is just an extension of that. We don't need to alter our plan. And real change of supporting where are you going? How are you going to evaluate your plan and make sure that it's a winner and not just, we handed out devices?
Yeah, really well said. I'm sure there are people that have talked about the tipping point. I really like that, Shaylin, of talking about the person that's in it for me versus in it for we, if I'm quoting you correctly. But I think Maine was in a funny position because we were, for those of you that don't know it, Maine has had one-to-one in 7th and 8th grade for 10 years now. This is our 11th. In every public school, 7 and 8 in the entire state. And yet, states that are going one-to-one statewide, 5 others joined us in our when we went out to bid for the devices a year ago. Those states have an advantage in a way because they're thinking about it from the current best practices. And what has happened in 10 years is, yes, the one-to-one itself has been there and has been sustained, but so too have some of the norms and the things that have not allowed it to grow and really develop. And I feel like some of the places that are approaching it newly actually have an advantage because they're saying, this is a tool for creation. This is a tool where we can teach digital citizenship and we don't have to lock down the entire network to, keep them away from every possible thing that's dangerous. Some of those pieces that there is a part of all this that allows for evolution and that has to allow for evolution that fits somehow into the mix of factors, and I kind of want to figure out how to name what those are. Like, what if I had to describe what a school or a district needs to be ready to think about? Sean said before we started broadcasting, if you roll it out in 3 classrooms and you are doing X, but you know that you're going to do it district-wide or school-wide, is that a pilot? Or is it some kind of sandbox? Like, is there a way we can think about that as a piece of the process? But there's almost like a whole range of steps that someone has got to be able to codify for us and say, okay, if you're looking to move in this direction, don't make the same mistakes I did. And maybe people know what that text is, but I haven't found it yet. And I feel like I'm cobbling together my own from my PLN and from my conversations, but it isn't. I haven't found it in any kind of organized way yet that is guiding me.
Yeah, but do you think that there is only one way? I mean, look at any implementation of initiative.
Mm.
There was a silver bullet for any of the problems our schools face, whether it's tech integration or literacy, then everyone would do it.
Yeah.
So maybe that magic silver bullet out there is dependent upon a lot of factors being in the right place at the right time that nobody can quantify.
I think what's right is of culture and community as well. You know, schools have specific needs. They have specific populace that they have to meet the needs of, and they have different pasts that direct them to where they've been. So, you know, I think a lot of it is a constant conversation. And we were talking about before, Maine got it early, but that means that Maine has to reinvent it before everybody else. And there's a cycle of reinvention and a cycle of evaluating what goes on in your community and figuring out where you're going to go next. You don't just go one-to-one and you're done, because eventually you're going to have it, you're going to be in place, and you're going to have to think, what's the next device I need? Do I need to change devices? Do we keep the same? Are we teaching right things so that if the devices change dramatically, that our students aren't going to be like shocked with something so new? Or you know, those are conversations that are always constant. You know, how are we measuring our success? That it's the handing out the devices is just the beginning, and going one-to-one in 10 years we'll be having new conversations. The same thing where we have to reinvent the one-to-one initiative, like. And it could be a new device that comes out, or just a different understanding of the deficiencies of one-to-one in 10 years when we look at it.
Mm. The question on the table now, actually it's a question to go, but it's raising some interesting points in the chat about workflow and learning management, and I think it's another example of a place where a district or a school can really get hung up and stuck, and I think Cape Elizabeth certainly came to a screeching halt around learning management when we went iPad one-to-one, and we were a Google Apps for Education school already, and then you layer the iPads on top of it. This is 4 years ago, and it was a deal breaker. I mean, people viewed it as the device that got in the way of their being able to use Google Apps for Education, and obviously that's evolved and changed, but I think it's another piece of sort of your process. And Shaylin, I know certainly, I agree with you fully, there's not going to be a silver bullet, but I also feel like there must be some kind of, you know, here are some basic elements, or something that would, you know, have you thought about X, Y, and Z as you're rolling out. And I would say the one we've talked about repeatedly, and I will say again in big bold letters, network. You must be able to carry the weight of all the devices so that they are in fact functioning at a high enough level that they're actually about teaching and learning and not about spinning rainbow wheels of death.
Or can I add that outlet? You need to have outlets. You need to be able to charge the devices, like silly little things that you have to kind of go back to and keep building up from, you know?
I had to put in a work request to uncover the outlets that were covered during our renovation. It was hilarious. Pardon me, please, can I have my electricity back, please? Or at least a generator. So yes, outlets and especially as you're thinking about space. But to me, a really close second to that, it goes back to what I said at the very beginning. It's not so much about the technology, but if the technology is layered on top of an infrastructure that's functioning and layered on top of some kind of learning management system, we're in the midst of trying to go with the state's mandate to move towards standards-based reporting and the total disconnect with PowerSchool, and they're being at odds with one another. And again, we are like at a screeching halt because we haven't laid out enough building blocks in advance to see where we're headed. And I guess that, Shaylin, is really where I wonder if there's some guidance to say to people, you know, these are things that need to be out there because you can have fantastic teaching and learning, and it may not reach anyone because there are other things that are in your way.
I think I'm actually working with a couple schools right now that are either piloting LMSs or like debating them or trying to figure out what it is. And I think a lot of it is deciding, like, forget about which tool for a minute, but what does learning look like over, say, the next 2 years? Because you have like that intro year of like everyone's starting to get used to it and you're kind of figuring out, so what are those expectations? Like, are you using it because you want a way to like push out content and collect it back, or are you using it as a way to start building community? Like, what are those primary functions that you want in the start, and then where do you want to go with it? And it's really like you have that first year, and you can call it a pilot even if everybody, but like, what are those core capabilities you want to do, and then where do you want to go from there? Because I'm working with one group that has kind of taken a sledgehammer to pound in a thumbtack. Like, they got a great LMS, but it is a beast. I mean, it's huge, and it's way more than what they need right now to just push something out and collect it back. And so it's becoming a challenge, whereas others have said, oh yeah, we want to make Google Classroom do all of these things, and it just doesn't yet. And so it's really defining those functions first, and then as Sean said, it's like network, and then more network.
Jonathan.
And Jonathan as well. And I actually was talking to an IT director the other day that said when they rolled out one-to-one, they actually planned their wireless infrastructure quarters to have 2 devices. Pretended it was 2-to-1, even though we're going 1-to-1 in terms of what they needed.
Beth, would you repeat what you just said, because hilariously, in talking about network stability, you cut out.
Oh, that's great. We're on a hotel network that's totally flaky. So I was talking to an IT director who said that when they were planning their wireless infrastructure, they actually planned on like 1 3/4 to 1. Like, they assumed people would have like 1 3/4 devices per person, because they realized that most teachers had like an iPad and a laptop, or a laptop and a phone, and then the kids, even though they were only supposed to have 1 device, like so many of them had a second device on the network. And so just planning for 1-to-1 wasn't enough, and so that's sort of their rule of thumb. And they said they almost wish they had planned it at like 2-to-1, and got twice of what they really thought they needed, just because of what's going on. I did this in my own teaching. It was great. I rolled out laptop carts and crashed everything. I got a handful. I had a laptop cart. I brought my entire network to its knees. And it wasn't that many more devices, because we just didn't even think about it at first. And then nobody used them, and they were expensive paperweights. Now I think we lost Jonathan.
No, I'm here. Sorry, I was getting out the next question. So this actually dovetails nicely with that question about the network piece, but the district I visited today, I said to Sean before we started, one of the greatest recommendations I have to people that are looking at one-to-one, whether they have it already or growing, however they view it, wherever you are in the process, is to visit other places and see what they're doing, because invariably, more minds on the table or around the table are going to do. I don't think you want minds on the table, do you? More minds around the table is a really powerful experience to sort of crowdsource solutions and things, but even just perspective taking. And so Cape Elizabeth, we're at 97 to 98% of wireless access to the internet at home, and our norms assume a series of additional devices back at home plus network access. This district I visited today is at 30% wireless, and when they get home. So they're on iTunes U because it is downloadable, and their athletes there in the northern part of Maine will frequently, one of their major competitors is Caribou. Well, Caribou's north of Canada. I mean, it's a long haul from where they are in Dover-Foxcroft, and their capacity to think about all of their athletes on the buses traveling an extraordinary amount, their LMS needed to support that. But so much that's cloud-based now assumes consistent access, and I think it's a great, as you said, Beth, sort of evaluating what is your need at this moment. Well, in Cape Elizabeth, those needs are completely different than they are in Dover-Foxcroft, even though we are both one-to-one iPad schools. And so as you said, Shayla, there's no silver bullet in that, but there would be you need to evaluate how much of your work needs to be done online versus not online for your population, and what are your expectations. And even if your building wireless is flawless, I don't know, whatever the equivalent is of food grade, just fantastically capable, it isn't necessarily the place where your kids are accessing. And so many places in Maine are offering wireless at home through portable wireless networks, that come through like a hotspot. Others are subsidizing home access. Public libraries are becoming school extended hotspots. But it raises for me, as the iPad and Apple has introduced Cloud Drive, do I have the name right? There are assumptions in place about what is happening for your population that really are ones you need to examine before anyone says to you, this is the best practice or the best way to go. Is anyone having a particularly positive or particularly notable cloud-based experience right now that is worth sharing in terms of what the cloud is offering as an option or as a norm for their one-to-one environments? Is the cloud cloudy?
I do have two things. First, can you rephrase that question, please, Jonathan?
So, is anyone having a particularly positive or sort of transforming experience doing something cloud-based that it's permitting that? I'm thinking as we close out the year, sort of what 2014 for us in CAPE at least has been a big move to cloud-based and getting off the devices as the assumption is this is a moment for creation, but the next really critical step is getting it elsewhere for public consumption, but also for storage and to free up what's on the iPad. And I didn't know whether people's experience with the new cloud, am I calling it the right name, Cloud Drive? No, the Apple's new product that is supporting the iPads in the cloud.
Yeah, Cloud Drive.
Okay, not Cloud Drive. Whether that's one, Google Apps for Education, which is what our norm is, or where else people are using cloud-based resources that are notable or that are really enhancing their one-to-one experience.
Well, I'm sure there's tons of examples. My own specific example, I think Reality Checked was year 2 in our district, and our tech director said, starting after Christmas, I'm no longer going to back up student devices or teacher devices on the server. And so if it means that much to you, you need to get it in the cloud or external hard drive. And that was probably about 6 years ago. So our students and our kids and our teachers learned fast that it was a necessity. And that is eye-opening when you have no one, you're used to working in place that backs up your computers and student computers, and something happens, they have it. And going from that huge shift, you couldn't plan it more perfect to give those kids experience of what it's like in college or what they would face the next year. So it was awesome.
I think that what we're doing is making it easier for people to leverage what they gain, what they archive, and what they know so much faster. You can take what you've stored with you wherever you are. You can access it wherever you are. Brendan, what was it earlier? Brendan Murphy was talking about how he needs personalization wherever he goes, and we were having a couple of tweets about the fact that personalization has to travel with you. Your connections have to travel with you. You log into Chrome on any computer, and now you've got all of your access to all of your tools and all of your documents at a moment's notice. And I think that makes it possible for learning to happen. I don't want to say at a moment's notice, but in a much more leveraged way, more regularly. And I hope that that'll be something that in my classroom is more dynamic and makes learning better. I think that we have to learn how to manage it because it starts off in first grade and they're archiving and staving and Evernoting and Google Driving everything that they create and all their products. Think of the abundance of just like clutter that they're saving. How are we training students to call what not to keep and how long to keep stuff and how to get rid of it and how to manage the weight? I think the weight of our information is eventually going to be overwhelming if we can't leverage it. And so I think that looking forward, it's awesome, it's great, there's some wonderful things, but we're not far away from getting some of the downside where we have to look at, okay, we have to address the issue of abundance. It's a little bit like food. Everyone in the world is starving and Americans are obese. And information, we had no information and now we've got too much, and that's going to create a similar shift and issues to address.
That's actually like what David Weinberger was saying. He said that last year in his iPad Summit talk, and I just finished his book, and he was saying that, it really, with the abundance of knowledge and the fact that knowledge is now networked, it used to be that everything was filtered based on what fit inside like the binding of a book, and now it's more like what can we fit, kind of within our heads, and then and just with the amount that we can actually work with. And so how are we teaching students to take everything that's out there and put it into something manageable that can do something with it? And that's going to tie, I think that ties back to what you said about personalization. Like, how can I create these systems for myself that make it so that I can easily access my notes, I can easily access my resources, I know where my research is, I can keep track of things. I used to chase advisees around when they were trying, like with the paper planner and the paper notebook, and now it's just magnified by 1,000. There's digital things to chase down now as well.
Just tweeted out that Chris O'Neill spoke at our main conference a couple weeks ago about organizing your digital life, and he was a big advocate. He said, I don't recommend very many products per se, but Evernote has proven to be a really remarkable way to do what you described, Beth, and sort of naming conventions and tags and things, but its searchability, and he said it's the one product he pays for the upgrade for. And I have to agree with him that I think having whatever you choose, having a place that is your assumed sorter and curator of your own information is a new norm that is totally different, and it you really can't be in a situation where all your bookmarks are on that device that's lost. In an iPad one-to-one district, the fallibility of these devices and their danger of self-destructing or being destroyed is so high that I love what your boss said, Shailene, or your director. There was a colleague of mine here who used to pre-plan with a member of the staff and put a broken computer in their lap, and in the middle of, in the introduction of each year, pick up that from them and say, if, for example, someone did this and took the laptop out of their person's lap, who dramatically responded and then threw it across the room and looked at the room and was like, so are you prepared? And it was a really sort of jerk move, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, it was totally brilliant in the sense of really emphasizing that if we're going to be an information-based culture and you are going to be a full participant in it, you cannot be dependent on that device. And what I have noticed as I started traveling more is that there is such a reliance on wireless and access to the internet that is becoming its own economy or sub-economy. And when we're in Chicago, paying for wireless in our own rooms was the norm, except that ours was in our package once we had it removed from the bill. It's a really interesting shift to take place, that you have to both curate all that information, but then if you're not going to be device dependent, you have to be able to get into the cloud. And this group of teachers and students today really saying to me, but what if your norm doesn't allow that? And I don't have a good answer. I was sort of stuck at the moment of, wow, every message I send about being cloud-based and being not device dependent gets thrown out the window when you don't have that kind of reliable pipeline.
I actually planned an entire iPad workshop day with no Wi-Fi a couple weeks ago because they called and said, "We're really sorry. I know we've planned this workshop on this day, but the district for maintenance and there won't be any internet. What do we do? Like, do we have to reschedule the workshop?" And like my flights were booked and everything was all set, and I'm like, "Nope, you gave me notice. We're gonna plan for no connectivity." And so it took a long time to actually plan for how are we going to do an entire day of creating and collaborating with no Wi-Fi. And there was some prep work, but we actually had a really good day and got pretty creative about things. But it was an interesting experiment because they were like, "Oh, do we just cancel?" I'm like, "No," because the reality is, a bulldozer is going to cut your internet cable one day, like mine, and you're going to have to fake it and see what you can do. So it was it was really hard to plan for not being connected.
We had a great, Maine is on pretty much one pipeline for schools because of Milty, and it literally was cut by digging for a water line, and it was a fascinating day to watch pretty much all of southern Maine go dark in the schools, and therefore all the public libraries and all the town halls and city halls too, which are all on this one physical, like only in my mind it's like a sewer pipe, but whatever it is, it was literally cut, and it was a fascinating 24 hours in Maine education as we were yelling and screaming for one-to-one and for connectivity, except when we all go dark. And how do you keep going if you've become so dependent? So
Creative.
right, be creative. Shaylin raised right before we started taping, where are we headed? What do we expect to see in the next 2 days, and how do those presage what's coming down the pike for us as we turn into 2015 and start to really think about what this next year of evolution is going to look like for one-to-one? Anyone care to jump in on that tiny question?
If you're gonna make it easy.
No, I mean,
Oh, cool.
it's such a big question. I'm just going to slice off a piece of it, and I think that I choose to focus on how the devices are going to change our relationships and how we interact with each other in the classroom. And I know that a lot of people fear that a common fear with schools going one-to-one is that teachers think that they might lose the relationships they have. And I think that we have to keep particular emphasis on the connections that we have and making sure that we construct good relationships and we construct sharing and we construct feedback with what we create and connect to the work that we do, the community, and share it. Because I believe that you can take these devices to create stronger relationships. And if we can do that, we're not just burying ourselves in information and we're not just isolating ourselves in front of a screen, we're constructing communities. And schools are effective because they're communities, and PLNs are effective because they're communities. And I think that if we can tie our into large nation. Yeah, Jeff.
So I think something that really resonated with me. Douglas Kang did a talk back in August, and he was talking about the power of technology in his classroom was not actually using it in his classroom, and that where he really found the power was to take that class time. Like what he thought of one-to-one was how it extended the relationships and extended the community beyond the class. So like in his class, it's not a lot of kids looking at screens. It's how the screens allow the students to connect outside of class. And that's something that's really resonated. I've heard so many teachers this fall in particular say, well, when kids don't have the face-to-face skills anymore, like they're not talking to each other, they're not communicating as much, they're looking at a screen. And it's like, well, maybe it's not about having the screens in class, and it's about how we use it to facilitate and increase the value of class. And I thought that was a cool point from him. That's sticking with me. That's my next big thought.
I don't think it's an accident that Douglas has a learning commons model too, that and they did this amazing research, and they have this incredible communally developed community space to do what we talked about earlier in terms of empowering conversation, empowering dialogue and interaction, not isolation. So it's culturally in his school, which is in Hawaii, I believe. So clearly, it's a value they have that is strongly held.
I can give my 2 cents. Oh, sorry, John.
No, go for it.
So for some of my research in my master's program, I was focusing on literacy, of course, and new literacy. And the New London Group says that the largest discrepancy and fastest growing is those with access to technology and those without. Surpassing socioeconomic. And I believe that. I think that not having access to technology robs kids of information and skills that are vitally important to be a citizen in today's in contemporary society. And so I see that more of a push for access not only to devices but internet for everyone. And when you place those devices and the information in the hands of the kids to be used as communication devices, kind of what Beth and Sean were talking about, and how to become part of that global sea of communication will be huge. On top of that, it is about relationships and not only how to use those devices, but then how to use it to change future opportunities for yourself. So having that mindset that you can do things different because you have access to information and opportunities.
Mm-hmm. We're kind of at our time. Did we lose Jonathan right there? Because that would have been funny if we lost him.
Well, thank you all.
Yep, we lost.
I will look forward to seeing some of you tomorrow and following the #ACT tomorrow, as well as the people that are highlighted in the schedule. I'll tweet that out again in just a second. But we have hundreds and hundreds of people coming together, and as we leave talking about community, that for me, Twitter and my PLN has been entirely about the opportunity to create the face-to-face relationships, and so this for me is the best part of these connections. So I will see you all tomorrow.
Yeah, hey, Jonathan, last word too on that is for those of you that aren't here in Boston, we will be live blogging as much of the event as we can. So follow iPad and EdTech Teacher blog. We'll have sketch notes, live blogs, video clips, everything that we can post. It'll all be out there.
Awesome.
Saba, I didn't see you there. I had a screen in front of you, and I didn't realize. Hello. I had another window on top of you, and I didn't see you were there. Sorry about that. All right.
No, I just didn't want to interrupt in the middle.
Thank you so much. Great evening.
Yeah.
See you tomorrow.